Thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you to all the folks who are joining here today, the many stakeholders, congressional staff, regulatory staff, press, and just folks that are interested in safety. My name is Shailen Bhatt. I'm the president and CEO of the Intelligent Transportation Society of America. And, it's really my privilege and honor today to host a webinar with leaders from around the transportation safety space. We have participants representing auto manufacturers, state DOTs, the safety community, law enforcement. We don't always agree on all issues, but we are united in our effort to protect the safety spectrum. And this group is just about a subset of the over 50 organizations that have been outspoken over the past few years opposing the proposal to reallocate a portion of the safety spectrum, which we want to be preserved for V2X technologies and transportation safety. Before I took this job, I was the executive director of the Colorado Department of Transportation. I was the secretary in Delaware, and I was a presidential appointee at US DOT. And in that 10 years, I can remember 10 years ago talking about getting to zero deaths in 2010, and in that decade since then, we've lost, close to 400,000 Americans on our roadways. And, when I took over Colorado DOT, we were at like 480 deaths per year. 3 years later, we were close to 700 deaths a year, a 10% increase year over year. And we know that the more than 36,000 fatalities that occur every single year, a vast majority of those can be mitigated through V2X technologies. V2X technologies can also significantly reduce the more than $800 billion in annual costs associated with traffic crashes. So we talk about, how do we get more money into the economy? That's $1 trillion a year in costs that are being siphoned out of the economy. And, we also want to be very clear that, V2X safety technologies fully utilize the 75 megahertz in the 5.9 gigahertz safety band spectrum. And we need sufficient dedicated spectrum to ensure uninterrupted high-speed communications for V2X communications to work safely. So whether it's DSRC, CV2X, or even new technologies that will come in the future, those messages must travel quickly and without interference. US DOT has said that the FCC's proposal could make the remaining 30 megahertz, if they take away 45 for unlicensed devices, the remaining 30 megahertz unusable due to interference. And the FCC has not provided any data to show that its proposal would allow V2X technologies to safely and effectively operate in the remaining 30 megahertz. So, we're carrying this message of safety. We've got some great stakeholders here. And right now I want to turn it over to John Bozzella of the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, who's been a great leader in this. John?
Well, thank you, Shailen, and thank you for your leadership at ITS America and on this really critically important issue. And I want to thank everybody who's joined us today to discuss the future of V2X technology, and notably what would happen to that future depending on the outcome of the FCC proceeding on the 5.9 gigahertz spectrum. I'm concerned about that future if the FCC proceeds as they've outlined in their notice of proposed rulemaking. I'm John Bozzella. As Shailen said, I'm the president and CEO of the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. We represent auto manufacturers that do 99% of new vehicle sales here in the United States, as well as tech companies and innovators in the broad smart vehicle technology space and the broader automotive ecosystem. The industry is united in wanting to ensure that V2X technology is deployed here in the United States and that we remain globally competitive on the next generation of smart vehicle technologies. And if you look around the world right now, the United States is the only country that's considering reducing the amount of spectrum available for V2X technologies. Other major markets, including China, are looking to expand spectrum associated with these life-saving technologies. And that would be concerning to us if we lose our competitive edge here. You know, it's really important that all 75 megahertz is preserved to optimize innovation in this space. And that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about unleashing the opportunity to innovate, to save lives on America's roadways. The auto industry is also united in its belief that we can deploy this technology. We're united in our commitment and belief to that this is critical to saving lives on America's roadways. And we also recognize, all of us, that we need all 75 megahertz free of harmful interference in order to realize all of these safety benefits. And I just want to close with a couple of thoughts about the hard work that companies across this industry have done to take on some of the hard challenges that the FCC is considering, you know, in this proceeding. And as a result of that hard work, we made two groundbreaking announcements back in April that are contingent on all 75 megahertz of spectrum being available for this technology. One, we made an industry build-out commitment to deploy 5 million V2X devices in the next 5 years. And secondly, we agreed on an industry consensus band plan that lays out how all 75 megahertz will be used for various V2X technologies. These are clearly indications that the industry is united and ready to go. And I think it's really important that the FCC and other policymakers consider these commitments as they look forward to resolving and working through the proceedings. So with that, Shailen, I'll send it back to you. And again, thanks for your leadership and for hosting today.
Yeah, John, no, really appreciate your the Alliance's commitment. I know Ford has been you know, out there on their commitment on CV2X. Toyota and GM have also been leaders in this space. I think the entire industry is united in our desire to preserve all 75, and just really appreciate your efforts. Next up, I'm going to go to both a good friend and a colleague that I've known for many years. Jim Timon is the executive director of the American Association of State Highways and Transportation Officials, or AASHTO. And, you know, AASHTO has been very consistent in their leadership in this fight. And so, Jim, just want to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Shailen. Really do appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you today. And you know, I think it's important, as Shailen mentioned, you know, this is state DOTs have been very consistent on this issue, and it's been a very important issue for us. You know, we represent AASHTO represents every state DOT across the country, and that includes the 50 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. And it's our members who are owning and operating the transportation facilities that move 80% of the people in freight across the United States. And they really have been on the forefront in helping to develop and deploy technology within that transportation network that makes it safer and more efficient. And a lot of that technology relies on the use of the 5.9 gigahertz safety spectrum. And John was, you know, did a great job of outlining from a vehicle standpoint how 5.9, the 5.9 safety spectrum helps that. But, you know, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the infrastructure side of that. You know, there was a time where that technology on the infrastructure side and the vehicle side didn't necessarily depend on each other. They worked more independently. But that time is gone. Now vehicles are communicating with the infrastructure, and that infrastructure that's owned by the state DOTs, the cities and counties, local governments, is extremely reliant on 5.9. We're seeing that infrastructure and that technology being deployed on a regular basis. Your state DOTs are already purchasing and installing and operating infrastructure-based technology that utilizes the spectrum, and it's really going to serve as the backbone for what vehicles are going to be using in the future to communicate with each other and with the infrastructure. Every state DOT in the country has already spent a significant amount of public money on the research and development and deployment of these technologies. We have about 12,000 pieces of infrastructure device that are already out there and installed and operating. And we think that it's through these deployments that we think we can see that next step in advancement from a safety standpoint and from an efficiency standpoint. A couple of important things that I want to point out as well. John mentioned that, and Shalyn as well, that it's really important for us to emphasize that we can't share this part of the spectrum with anything else. I mean, that some of the research that state DOTs have already done has shown that partial utilization of the spectrum just isn't going to work, that we need the entire 5.9 gigahertz for us to be able to fully capture the benefits of connected vehicle, connected infrastructure technology. And finally, at the core of this issue is safety. Every state DOT in the country wants to get down to zero traffic fatalities. And the only way that we're going to be able to do that is to utilize technology more so than what we're using now. And that utilizing the technology that we have that relies on 5.9 gigahertz, making sure that our vehicles are being able to communicate with each other and with the infrastructure is a key piece for us being able to get down to zero traffic fatalities. AASHTO is committed to that. Every state DOT in the country is committed to this. Every state DOT in the country signed on to a letter to the FCC opposing their proposal to reallocate the spectrum. We still feel very strongly about that. We are still committed to that opposition. We want to make sure that the FCC keeps this part of the spectrum where it belongs with transportation safety. And we're really thankful to be part of this coalition, to be working with Shalyn and the other members of the coalition on this issue. And with that, Shalyn, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Jim, so much. And I think you touched on, the significant investment that states have made, that the federal government has made, that our private sector partners have made. This is something that has been in development for a number of years and is now actually live, being deployed, and just such a really poorly timed, proposal to say now we're going to open it up to unlicensed devices and potentially impact the entire spectrum. So appreciate the state DOT perspective there. Next up, those of us who are sort of transportation geeks, we can really get down into this, but it's important to have partners from across the spectrum and on the media side and just outreach to consumers. I think is incredibly important. And next up, I'm going to turn over to David Friedman, who is Vice President of Advocacy for Consumer Reports. David?
Thanks a lot, Shalyn. Also, I just want to flag that I'm a former deputy and acting administrator of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And I was there when the staff was really digging in and working across DOT to try to figure out how to make this technology work. I work for Consumer Reports, and we are an 84-year-old independent, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization with more than 6 million members. And I so strongly agree with what Shalyn said at the beginning too. It says so much that this group, this unique mix of organizations is standing together today. We all strongly agree that the FCC should preserve the 5.9 gigahertz band for transportation safety so that V2X technology can be a critical part of efforts to save lives on our roads. So from that, I want to talk about this issue from the perspective of who all this technology is for: the American public, consumers. Consumer Reports, our guiding principle is that the market must work for consumers. And that means safe products and services should come standard every single day in every single transaction. We've always worked to put safety first on our roads. From our advocacy to require seatbelts on all new cars more than 50 years ago to V2X today. We've also supported for a long time better, faster, and more affordable broadband internet access for consumers, including through more unlicensed spectrum for Wi-Fi. Our long support for both of these priorities, I really think puts us in a unique position on this whole debate around the 5.9 band. And in classic CR fashion, after we did our due diligence, after thoughtful consideration, we determined that safety must come first in this situation. Look, in a typical year, 100 Americans die every single day in traffic crashes. And it's the leading cause of death in the first 3 decades of your life in this country. Our families can't keep losing more friends and loved ones. And consumers and our economy just can't afford the terrible toll that this means to our economy and our marketplace. Now, NHTSA's research has shown that vehicle-to-vehicle communications alone could prevent or reduce the severity of more than 6 out of every 10 car crashes each and every year when fully phased in, while at the same time saving consumers hundreds of billions of dollars each year. That's why we've got to preserve the 5.9 band for transportation safety. It's pretty straightforward. Now, the FCC's plan, reallocating 45 megahertz for unlicensed use, that would just be a drop in the bucket for Wi-Fi users and for telecom equipment when you compare it to the 1200 or 1.2 gigahertz already opened up from them earlier this year. The gains that we would get from this small amount just don't justify the real cost to safety that would result. And I also want to point out, it's not just about V2X technology and safety applications that would suffer from a loss in the spectrum. It's also how those applications would work with future technologies like self-driving cars. The safety of those vehicles is going to rely heavily on V2X communications. We've got to get it right today, and we've got to get it right for the future. On top of all this, look, this is where the American consumer is. Our surveys show over and over again that safety is one of the top considerations for new car buyers. So after years of stalled progress on this critical auto safety technology, I think consumers would really appreciate their leaders taking action and showing them that they are putting their safety first. That's what's necessary in terms of the FCC not rolling back this spectrum, and for industry and government all working together to accelerate V2X technology as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thanks, David. And I thank you for your service at NHTSA. And yeah, I mean, NHTSA has been unequivocal in their statements around how important V2X technologies are. And I think you make a great point about, we've even said that we are open to sharing the safety spectrum, provided they're assessing to show that it doesn't interfere with the safety critical communications. And why at this time, when the FCC has already opened up, 1,200 megahertz, of these channels for Wi-Fi, why do you need 45 megahertz that will have such a deleterious impact on safety? Is just a really puzzling challenge for us. So, but thank you for all of the very balanced work that you've done in this field. Next up, we're going to turn to law enforcement. And this one is a little personal for me. When I was the executive director in Colorado, we actually lost a state trooper, a member of the state patrol on I-25. His name was Trooper Cody Donahue, and he was struck by a vehicle on the side of I-25 while investigating another crash. And I went to his funeral, and his family was there, and we lose way too many members of law enforcement, firefighters, first responders, due to crashes and secondary crashes. And we know that V2X is incredibly important to reducing that. So next up, we have Sheriff Paul Fitzgerald, who's a former president of the National Sheriff's Association. Are you there, Sheriff? Did he?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. I appreciate your introduction. And I also appreciate being invited to participate in this discussion today. There are several coalitions that I am involved in trying to protect public safety spectrum. It's like swimming in the ocean among the sharks, where they'll try to reach up and keep grabbing bites of our spectrum and taking it away from us. We have fights in public safety right now from 4.9, 5.9, the T-band. There's a lot of issues, but there's always a grab for our spectrum. And the more we can be united is what helps us save and preserve the spectrum. I'm one of the other committees that I'm on is under DHS, Science and Technology. And we've been looking at, first of all, starting out with vehicle-to-vehicle technology on how to communicate. And that came out of a need because of law enforcement, fire, and EMS as they respond to a significant event. How many times these emergency vehicles collide at an intersection trying to get to the event. Therefore, it's going to increase the time, life-saving time of first responders getting to that scene, and also the cost, the potential injury to the first responders driving those vehicles. And the idea of vehicle to vehicle was as you have, say, a traffic accident, and you have ambulances, fire trucks, police officers speeding to the scene, sometime from the same agencies, but quite often, especially in the Midwest where I'm at, you have responses coming from various agencies. And if they're trying to get to that scene and they collide at an intersection, that's a huge problem. So anyway, the vehicle to vehicle was to allow responders to be able to communicate with other responding vehicles, so the drivers of those vehicles would know when they have another emergency vehicle nearing the same intersection that they're arriving at. And from there, the concept is it would expand to vehicle to everything, which would be one day, hopefully, vehicles, emergency responder vehicles, would be able to communicate to the public, the motoring public, as they're driving in the same location, to alert them that there are emergency vehicles approaching. We have, right now, we look at the unlicensed spectrum that's out there. They're looking at trying to take 45 megahertz of our 75 spectrum that we're fighting to keep in the 5.9. Well, above us, there's 580 megahertz of unlicensed spectrum, and below us, there is another 850 megahertz of unlicensed spectrum. So they already have 1,430 megahertz of spectrum. So if they take our 45, that's going to just increase them to 1,475 megahertz of spectrum, leaving us with 30 megahertz of spectrum. And there's no guarantees or protection of interference that's going to be involved, and that's going to create a terrible safety problem for everyone who is out there trying to utilize this same spectrum. It's absolutely imperative that we keep all 75 megahertz of this spectrum in order for keeping the public and law enforcement safe. It's just a travesty that parts of our government working with the industry is trying to reduce and make us less safe so they can have more profitability on the other side.
Thank you so much, Sheriff. And you raise a really strong point, which is, one of the earliest deployments for VitaX was, changing signals so that emergency responders, as you say, could get to crash scenes more quickly and more safely. And we know that that is out there. It's being used now, and it just, I think there would be vast agreement amongst most Americans that if you've been in a crash, you want that first responder to get there as safely and quickly as possible. So thank you for your service, and thank you for your leadership in this space. Before I went to Colorado, I was the Secretary of Transportation for the state of Delaware, and ran across Sergeant John Samus, who is with the Delaware State Police, but is also the president of the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. And I'd like to turn it over to him to talk about the importance of VitaX as well.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And like you said, I'm Sergeant John Samus with the Delaware State Police, but I'm also the president of the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, which is an organization that represents the men and women responsible for keeping our roadways safe by ensuring that those operating in the commercial motor vehicle industry comply with the applicable safety regulations. So from the trucking enforcement perspective, potential benefits of the V2X are limitless. The technologies being deployed today and on the horizon will dramatically improve the quality and reach of commercial motor vehicle enforcement. It will help inspectors more swiftly and accurately identify unsafe drivers, vehicles, and companies, and then remove them from our roadways, which will save lives and prevent crashes. Today, inspectors conduct about 4 million inspections a year, which means we're only looking at a small fraction of the trucks and buses on the roads each day. But V2X will allow us to expand our reach and help us prioritize and shine a spotlight on that small portion of the industry that disregards safety. And those operators who are disregarding that safety, they know when and where to drive to avoid our enforcement. But V2X could change that, helping us hone in on those most in need of intervention without impeding those who are operating safely on the roadways. So V2X will allow vehicles to communicate with other vehicles, infrastructure, and enforcement, and even vulnerable road users, making the roads safer for everyone, including the critical drivers who keep our nation's economy running. We're on the cusp of the next revolution in transportation, with potential for real safety benefits from connected and smarter vehicles, along with more sophisticated and effective enforcement tools. It is critical that this portion of the spectrum remain dedicated to life-saving technology. That is why CVSA and our membership are involved in this coalition. The limitless potential for improvements in commercial motor vehicle safety for saving lives is built upon the assumption that the 5.9 spectrum is protected and reliable. And we can't build the next generation of safety technology without it. So we're hoping that this will remain for enforcement and emergency use only. I appreciate you allowing me to be here today.
Thank you so much, Sergeant. And you touch on a few things. I mean, freight is such an integral part of American life, and both on the inspection side, but a lot of freight operators are working with our state DOT partners. You talked about that we're just on the cusp around things like platooning trucks, and that requires the 5.9 spectrum. And so there are just so many multiple deployments that are out there right now. And I do feel like we are on the cusp. And just again, I touch on the as we're all united and we're all on the verge of finally being able to use this, it would just be such a shame if the FCC were at this moment to say, let's take away 45 megahertz and provide it when they've already given so much to unlicensed and Wi-Fi to begin with. So, I want to thank everybody who tuned in today, and I hope you were able to get a sense of, just in our short amount of time, just how unanimous the opposition is to the FCC taking this action. You have law enforcement, we've got freight operators, we've got states, we've got automobile manufacturers, and again, there are many other organizations that we couldn't get everybody on, but there are very few issues we can all agree on. But this is one where we have unanimous consent that this is something that we all want to come on and say the FCC should not take this action at this time. We think the FCC should listen to transportation safety experts, both here on this call, at USDOT, and in the majority of the comments that were submitted to the docket, and abandon the proposal to reallocate 45 megahertz of spectrum away from transportation safety. So thank you for joining us today to hear why protecting the entire 5.9 gigahertz band is so important. And if you have questions for us, feel free to submit them either to ITS America or to the organizations on here today. And thank you so much, and please stay safe out there. And thanks to all our panelists. Really appreciate your efforts in communicating this message. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.